Hey everyone, I'm John Carvello, president of Stone Oak Capital and Divestopedia. I'm so excited for this topic today on how top M&A deal makers utilize technology to improve the transactions that they work on. I want to thank our sponsors, Intralinks, for hosting this event. If you have specific questions, we'll address them towards the end of the hour. So we have an awesome group of panelists joining us today. Representing the sell side, we have Kenneth Marks, founder and managing partner at High Rock Partners, Inc. Representing the buy side, we have Eric Jones, who spent 5 years in corporate development at Comcast and is now transitioning into a similar role at GoPuff. And our technology expert today is Ben Collins, director of product marketing and strategy at SS&C Intralinks. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, John.
For sure. Kenneth, could you maybe share a little bit on your background and provide an overview for the audience of, just the M&A deals you work on to give them context?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And thanks for, John, thanks for putting this together. So as you mentioned, I've got a firm called High Rock Partners. It's a small boutique M&A advisory firm. We're located in Raleigh, North Carolina. We really focus on what's probably considered lower middle market. Our deals tend to be from 5 million to up to 100 million, tend to be generalists. 2/3 of our work is sell side, and then about 1/3 of it's buy side, where we're acting as kind of the corporate development function for larger middle market companies doing acquisitions in the lower middle market space. So it's great, glad to be here today.
Yeah, and Kenneth, you literally wrote the handbook on the middle market.
I was very, very fortunate with a large group of some great collaborators to have a book through John Wiley and Sons called Middle Market M&A. It's through our trade association, Alliance of M&A Advisors.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being here. Eric, could you share with us your background and just give us some context on kind of the M&A transactions that you work on?
Sure, of course. So as John said, I have a pretty broad buy-side M&A background. Started out at a private equity firm in Philadelphia called LLR Partners and spent about 5 years there looking at middle market private equity deals. As John said, I spent the last 5 years working at Comcast on the corporate development team, working on everything from smaller sort of tuck-in asset acquisitions to joint ventures to big strategic public deals like the acquisition of Sky that closed a couple of years ago. Which was a $48 billion deal. And I'm transitioning into a similar role at GoPuff, which is an e-commerce startup in Philadelphia. So very excited about that as well.
Awesome. Ben, would you want to give us your background? I know that you are, I've called you our technology expert for today, but you also have an investment banking background. Maybe just share with the audience your expertise.
Yeah, sure, John. And I think the actual technology experts within my organization are probably cringing when you refer to me like that. But I know enough to be dangerous and really look forward to the conversation today. I think it's going to be a good one and always appreciate partnering with Divestopedia on these things. So yeah, I have been with Intralinks, have had a front row seat to a lot of deals over the past 10 years as director of strategy and product marketing. But before joining Intralinks, was a practitioner, so spent some time as director of corporate development at Cognizant Technology Solutions, so working on the buy side there. And then prior to that was an investment banker working on the sell side. So focused on the tech space primarily, but I've sat on both sides of the deal table and brought that experience to Intralinks.
Great, that's great context for our discussion today. So let's move on and let's talk about the current state of technology use in M&A transactions. Eric, there really appears to be a relatively slow adoption of technology in the M&A industry. Do you find this to be true? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think it's very true. The question as to why, it's a good question. I think it's probably a little bit of inertia. I think, just a hesitancy to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of mentality. I think on the buy side, especially, you've got pretty thin deal teams where maybe you're dealing with 2 or 3 folks that are kind of running the transaction. And there isn't quite the pain point yet that justifies, implementing some big new solution. But, one of the areas, especially at a big company like Comcast, our full due diligence teams could be 100 people plus. across all the different functional areas. And so I think more and more, there needs to be a technology solution or a collaboration solution to be able to bring all these folks together, to kind of do the diligence, summarize the results, bring everything together, and just coordinate across all these people.
Mm-hmm. Kenneth, I'm a sell-side advisor and want to get your take on this, but do you think that sell-side advisors sometimes have concerns over disintermediation with technology, where maybe the investment banker their role gets kind of redundant, and do you think that maybe that concern is warranted?
I think that does exist. I think there's some concern around that, and I think that depends on the size of the group. We've got boutique firms where you have small deal teams, as you were talking about. Time is precious, so I think it is tough. I think the fear is unwarranted, though, in the sense that it depends on how you look at what you do. For us, I think the technology should enable us to actually do more deals and be more productive, and increase the likelihood of getting deals done, which is one of the key things that I think you have to factor in. And then the fear around disintermediation is, I think that, well, my perspective is that there's a component for us as deal makers that's beyond the technology. A lot of what technology can do is the blocking and tackling and the things that can be automated. And then if you look at the things that are difficult to automate that we do are they're actually the fun things, which are, when you're dealing with strategy, you're not going to replace that in today's world yet. It'll be a while before that happens. The things that are more nuanced, some of the relationship things, some of the wisdom that you get from doing deals and know how to navigate the deal process. And then some of the, if you call it, a lot of the things that can be automated are IQ related things. And a friend of mine uses the term EQ. Some of the people pieces, you're not going to automate those. So I'm not worried about being out of a job because of technology. I'm excited about it because it allows me to do more and more of the fun stuff. So I'm not sure if that's what you were thinking about, but.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Kenneth. But Ben, of course, the current world has really accelerated the adoption and pace of change with technology, and maybe let us know and tell us how that's kind of moved into the M&A world.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And so, like Eric mentioned, at the outset here, it is a pretty slow evolving market when it comes to tech adoption, and referring to the M&A practitioner market. And I think, there's a couple reasons for that. But if we look back over the past 20 years, really the major change was virtual data rooms. I started my career lugging bankers' boxes around, and that was not an enjoyable experience, but I guess it was part of paying your dues. And I'm not that old. I'm not sure if the HD cam picks up the grays in my beard, but that was about 20 years ago, and there really hasn't been a major evolution in terms of the tech since. There have been some things around the periphery, and I think one of the reasons for that is just deal makers are really good at using Excel as a workaround, so we can configure models and use those for tracking progress and project management applications and so forth. But I think one of the things that's been borne out over the past couple quarters, couple months since the pandemic reared its head is that a lot of those kind of what I would call chronic pains and maybe lingering process inefficiencies have become a lot more acute, just because of the remote work environment and some of the challenges that's brought about. So I think we saw a lot of companies hit the pause button once the pandemic really took effect and had implications across the market back in March. But I think people have started to adapt their processes, and some of the tools that they've been kicking the tires on, they're starting to utilize. And so it'll be interesting to see and worth keeping an eye on, what sticks post pandemic, when we return to normal, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And I can definitely relate. I use Excel for everything. So I'm in that boat. I really want, with this conversation, I want to move through the different phases of the deal process, starting at deal sourcing and deal marketing. So Kenneth, how do you use technology in the deal marketing phase to find the right buyer for your clients?
Yeah, it's so if you think about the front end of the process, if we take Excel as the baseline, right? And so you start saying, well, what is technology beyond Excel? On the front end, we're all aware of there are lots of databases for research having to do with valuation, benchmarks, competitive intelligence, things of that nature. And those are getting, better and smarter and things like that. So that's a level of on the very front end that we use. We do use data rooms for preliminary kind of building out a data room in advance of a transaction. That's kind of the prep work before you go to market. As far as obviously what's happened here in the last, we've been doing it for a number of years. We've been using some of the video collaboration for many years to try to work with different advisors in the process, as well as we get ready to go to market, as well as our clients, working with our clients and different, especially if they have multiple locations and things like that. But clearly, the COVID impact has made those much more popular, whether it's a Zoom or a Teams. Just depends on which one you like, or which one the group ends up adopting, right? There's also, there are tools, technology tools that are allowing us to create slicker pitch decks. That we try different things, from things that allow us to do prettier graphs and charts and things of that nature that are beyond Office or Excel. I would say that the part that probably is still not as we haven't done as good a job is we still use Excel for the outreach process and managing and tracking the conversations with potential buyers. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. The step right before that, which is identification of buyers, whether it's strategics or financial, and particularly in strategics, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the use of technology and machine learning, AI, and things of that nature, as you start to say, how do we get smarter about identifying buyers and buyer groups, and opportunities to create some kind of a unique kind of what we call outliers in the process, which are those buyers that can see more value than everybody else can.
Yeah. No,
so I'd say that tracking and managing the process is one of those areas that definitely for our firm would be ripe for using some technology that we're not at this time.
Ben, with the deal sourcing and deal marketing, what are some of the areas or challenges or efficiencies that your clients would like to see when they're using technology to kind of solve the issues?
Yeah, so one of the key themes that we hear time and again is actually one that Kenneth just mentioned. Just that there's a lot of grunt work just in terms of tracking the distribution of the information memorandums, the NDAs, the offering memorandums. All of that is time not very well spent in a deal process. And so one of the things, there's just that distribution element, but also it's about trying to get insights into how potential buyers or investors are interacting with the documents you send them. So have they even opened the teaser? Have they reviewed the offering memorandum, and in turn being able to share that with their clients, right? So that level of transparency, clients are always clamoring, especially at the start of a transaction, for more information. Bankers are scrambling to get that information and relate it. And so, we've developed an application focused on deal marketing that automates some of that distribution, some of that tracking. So taking it out of Excel and really trying to automate some of those key steps. And I think this process in particular is really one that needs some attention right now, John, because buyers lists are expanding in this environment. So what was once maybe a 5 to 10 firm or company buyer list in the beginning of this year, there are unsettled cash situations. There's uncertainty around just buyer appetite, and so we're seeing just general expansion of those buyers lists. And so that just compounds the problem, right? So what was once, 20 or 10 firms that were trying to track activity across, now it's 20, now it's, or it could be 30. So the pain is really just being exacerbated. So, and one of the reasons we rolled out that deal marketing solution earlier this year.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always think, is there such a thing as a kind of a targeted, sell side process anymore? Just because there's such access to information and buyer lists and all of that. Switching maybe to the buy side. Eric, what technological tools are you using for deal sourcing, and where do you see potential improvements of the process?
Sure. So, I mean, look, there's obviously good CRM systems out there these days. There have been for probably the last 10 or 15 years, whether it's, Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or, whatever. As sort of a large corporate buyer, we're fortunate in the sense that there's a lot of inbound stuff coming to us. And so it's probably less about organizing outreach and more about keeping track about what's coming into the funnel, so to speak. And as Kenneth alluded, I think a lot of that still gets managed in Excel, quite frankly. And that's probably well and good for like the current reporting, what's in the system now, what's moved out of the system, how are things moving along from sort of, initial review to signing an LOI to full scale due diligence to closing. I think that stuff is kind of doable in Excel, where it becomes, and look, the other end of the spectrum is, again, going back to where the pain points are. If it takes an analyst or an associate or somebody on the deal team a few hours a week to kind of organize that and package it up and create a report, I don't know that pain point is large enough to, make people go out of their way to search for a more complex technology solution. Where it really falls short, in my experience and in my opinion, is when you want to do some data mining and go back to the past and say, okay, well, what did we look at 5 years ago? Or what happened when we talked to this company 3 years ago? Or did they switch bankers? Do they have a massively different financial profile today? And I think, that level of granularity and that level of detail, it either falls through the cracks or nobody's tracking it, or it just, it's impossible to kind of get to that level of detail with Excel. And so, I think the immediate sort of day-to-day needs can be covered with Excel, but when you really want to go back in time and data mine and be thoughtful about the past, I think that's where it sort of falls short.
Mm-hmm. On the actual deal sourcing, Eric, like, is there any sort of technology or some obstacles that you're finding in terms of just kind of sourcing deals and finding opportunities?
I mean, so much of it, and again, Kenneth, I think spoke to this earlier, so much of it is still relationship based, whether it's, a formally banked deal or, relationships with other companies in a certain industry or executives. And so it's not, I wouldn't say that we're going out to any kind of, marketplace or a posting board or anything like that, where we leverage those types of technologies to find deals. As I said, we're fortunate in that so much of it comes to us. And again, as Ben and Kenneth both said, there's just so much information flow out there these days, and everything is so well banked, everything from very small niche, sectors all the way up through the middle market and the bulge bracket. We haven't really found the need to rely on anything outside those relationships.
Mm-hmm. So you feel that all, the relevant opportunities are finding you because, like you said, everything is so well banked.
I think that's right. I hope that's right.
Ben, moving on to just due diligence, so important, especially right now. Can you just share with us like some innovations on the data room side? Like the virtual data room is kind of the first introduction that I had to use of technology in the M&A world, where you moved from a physical data room that hosted kind of all of the client's information to something online. But maybe just talk to us about kind of innovations that you're seeing and being involved in on the virtual data room side.
Sure, John. So I would say I would point really to one of the innovations we actually recently announced, and that's an integration point in partnership with Zoom to allow for just the easy ability for folks who are leveraging the Zoom application to post recordings to the virtual data room just in a couple clicks. So it's a really simple, easy way for people to start enhancing their existing processes by leveraging video. So we actually have heard from a number of folks on the sell side primarily, just trying to explore different ways in this current environment to leverage different mediums to support their deal processes. And so and people are getting pretty creative. So this was, instead of the traditional teaser or offering memorandum, can they create some sort of a video to support this? And that would be, either complement the book or even replace it. And so, wondering how we could, help them facilitate the secure storage and also just the distribution of those different assets. And so, I think a lot of forward-looking bankers, advisors, and sellers are looking to video as a way to complement existing processes. And so at Intralinks, given the proliferation and the dependence on Zoom, saw that as an opportunity for us to integrate, allow people just a really easy, quick way to post those files for consumption in a virtual data room. So, one of the things that we've been hearing, we'll continue to keep an eye on and monitor. But we'll continue to see how that develops. But I think that going forward here, video will probably play a larger role in the due diligence process than it typically has. It's had kind of some spot applications here and there, but now companies are thinking about how can we do a management presentation or how can we do a site visit virtually, and that's one of the ways to get those things done in a tricky environment.
Yeah, a great segue into my next question. So Eric, in this environment with restricted travel and restricted physical interaction, how are you performing virtual due diligence and really just getting comfort over the opportunities that you're looking on?
Sure. So I think Ben hit the nail on the head. The virtual management meeting has become sort of the standard of the day, right? And so, especially if there's not a pre-existing relationship and it's a new team that you're interacting with. I think everything kind of starts with the Zoom meeting or the WebEx or whatever. And look, I think there still is a need for the information memorandum and the teaser and sort of the management presentation, just so that you can distribute it to a broader team and get folks up to speed and get people engaged on the deal. And so I think those kinds of tangible summaries and things like that are probably more critical now than ever. Obviously, I think the point at which you switch from the need to, it used to be you want to get in front of management as soon as possible, right? And be able to have an in-person interaction and, just go to the office and get in front of them and start doing your due diligence. Nowadays, I think that bar has kind of been pushed out more and more. And obviously, we're trying to find ways to do more and more virtually. That's where I think, data rooms are more and more critical than ever, maybe even at earlier stages in the game. But I think, each deal is different. And if you're talking about, technology deals or software deals or media deals, there's probably less need, quite frankly, to be on site for 90% of the due diligence we're doing. If you're buying a manufacturer and you need to see their facilities and their plants, that's a whole different story. And so I imagine it's very different sort of sector by sector and very different by buyer type, so to speak. But I think the point at which you need to get to that, in-person meeting has obviously gotten pushed out farther and farther as we've gone through the pandemic. And I think, Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other products have really, filled that void pretty well in the current state of affairs.
Has that delayed the timing of transactions, or do you feel that just that, physical point of meeting people has been delayed?
It's a good question. I think it's probably just the physical meeting time has been delayed. I think, a deal can continue to move forward at the same pace as it did in, under normal circumstances. I think, when the pandemic and the work from home started back in March, there might have been a little bit of a, delay in how do we sort of, especially deals that were in process. But I will say, almost every deal that was signed, under LOI and sort of moving through due diligence, they closed eventually. It just, it took time for people to sort of figure out where to pick things up and how to pick things up and get everything kind of across the finish line. But everything I was working on, I think everything my team was working on got across the finish line eventually, over the course of the spring and summer.
Great. Kenneth, as a sell-side advisor, how are you using technology to manage due diligence virtually and, also communicate the value proposition for your clients?
Well, it's been an interesting dynamic. And I think if you ask the question in April, the response will be slightly different than it is today, particularly with some of the questions around face-to-face meetings and things like that. At kind of a rudimentary, we're talking about tracking information in data rooms and so forth. We've made a step, which is one step beyond Excel, which is it's kind of we use an online cloud-based Excel spreadsheet. It's not a Google. It's more of a proprietary encrypted. It becomes for tracking of due diligence lists and open items and things like that. It's works pretty well for us. It's probably not as elegant as an integrated system that is tied to the data room. Probably helpful for that to happen, and for us to use a system like that. And the video collaboration, obviously, with Teams and Zoom and so forth, that's been really helpful. And I think that our clients, we've had, it's interesting. The clients that the new clients that we've started relationships with since March have largely come to us through relationships, but the getting to know them now has been much more. We've had these back and forths. Do we want to meet in person with those clients? And a lot of times they'll say, "Hey, let's go ahead and meet electronically first," and we've moved the relationship further along using technology than we ever would have before. And that this pandemic has opened the door to do that, and it's actually allows us to be a lot more efficient in some cases where there's travel and things like that. So. I still think about, I was involved in a panel back in early April where we had some private equity investors, and I was, there's a lot of reluctance. There's this idea, and I still think it makes sense, is are you going to deploy capital? Are you going to invest in a company without really spending face-to-face time with the management team? And I think that we're, as an industry, gaining more traction and becoming comfortable that there are other ways to lessen the amount of time or push those meetings later in the process. And I think that's what Eric was saying, is you can get a lot more done, and you can. But I think eventually you've got to be face to face with people. You got to be comfortable with them. So to answer, kind of, I have two other thoughts. One is to answer your question about how to get clients comfortable with that. What I found is that clients have generally over the last few years gotten comfortable with technology, particularly when they, most of our clients are not repeat sellers. We're doing, these are family businesses or they're entrepreneur-run businesses, and they're selling for the first time. A lot of our work is we're either selling to strategics or private equity. And when they realize, if they're selling to a strategic, that all of a sudden there's 20, 30, 40 people on the other side of the due diligence list, as Eric, their teams, I'm sure you've got people from every different department or different function, or using technology to track that and to manage that. They become a lot more receptive when they realize the number of interactions that are involved. So I think that just awareness softens them up a little bit and brings them into reality that, hey, this really will help us manage the distraction factor of a transaction within a small company, a lower middle market organization. The other thing from a due diligence perspective that I thought's been interesting, Eric, you mentioned the different sectors. And I think that when you have sectors that are manufacturing, or you do have physical products and goods, one of the things we've seen is, and we've seen it from two perspectives. We've seen it from the buyer perspective, and we've seen it from a quality of earnings perspective, is using FaceTime kind of technologies for virtual walkthroughs, but live. I mean, so if you want to do an inventory count, I was talking to a peer of mine, or a friend of mine that runs a pretty sizable accounting firm, and said that they were talking about using to do monitor inventory counts or to do testing for quality of earnings, it's a lot more efficient, they found, to do a FaceTime type interaction. They can, it may take a little longer time at the actual work session, but if you included travel and all the other elements, it's much more efficient. And so we've also, from just a client perspective, had the opportunity to use FaceTime for walkthroughs of plants where, hey, take us through your plant. Let's use FaceTime, and maybe we'll have a couple of different FaceTimes running, and let's do it as if we were almost there, but let's go ahead and do the walkthrough. So.
I've seen.
If I could just jump in, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've actually seen, and this just speaks to the creativity, on the sell side of both sellers and their advisors. But I've seen pre-recorded tours, pre-recorded product demos, sort of pre-canned videos as part of the teaser or the management presentation or the investment memorandum. So I think people are kind of maybe necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And so people are getting really creative in how they're coming up with these tools in advance. And I think that does speak to the efficiency that can, especially earlier in the processes, that can be achieved through technology. So it's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen confirmatory due diligence done through like that FaceTime or just online video, or just frankly using your cell phone to take a video of what you're trying to confirm. So Eric, moving on to maybe deal management or deal closing process. You mentioned that you have dozens to maybe hundreds of people on a team to close a deal. What types of technologies are you using to manage all of these teams, to manage the deal overall and really help facilitate closing?
Sure. I think, again, this is where, the sort of nuts and bolts of a good data room. And that is, I think, where most of us from an M&A standpoint kind of, have had our initiations to technology, and still where a lot of the technology, I think, is used. And we're huge consumers of data rooms and being facile in using them and making sure that we have these big teams that are able to get in there. And finding ways, again, leveraging Excel in a lot of ways to just keep track of the request list and responses and trading, back and forth, and how, trying to just check things off the list and who's responsible for reviewing this section and that section. And, nowadays, and, Ben can speak to this better than I can, of course, but, there are ways to sort of send a folder in the data room to somebody and say, hey, this is your responsibility, or, send messages within the data room. And so I think people are getting used to that and getting, up to speed. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is still just, sort of project management and following up in person and giving people a call or shooting an email and saying, hey, we need you to take a look at this and give us your feedback as soon as possible. So I think it's the data room, it's Excel, it's, just kind of personal project management and keeping in touch with people.
Are there specific like project management tools that you're using, or is it an internal based, or is it Excel? Are we going back to Excel here?
It's mostly Excel, to be honest with you.
Yeah, we use Microsoft Project and Smartsheet. So,
Ben, what are you seeing clients use as project management tools, or
Excel? Yeah, it goes back to and that goes back to my earlier comment, John, is, a lot of us came up through, kind of the ranks of investment banking, where those shortcut keys are embedded in you. And while they've changed a little bit over the years, you're trained to use Excel at a pretty high level. And so, yeah, I think all of us probably are guilty of using it in areas of our lives where it's probably not even, a simple Post-it note would probably suffice. But yeah, that's the common thing that we hear, John, is using Excel. And like Eric said, it's trying to provide kind of a more structured environment. The person leading the transaction, like Eric, his job is doing due diligence and uncovering risks. The person who's brought in to review the HR documentation or the IT infrastructure, they have day jobs, and so they need a little bit more guidance and shepherding through that process, and so they may have questions as well. So how does someone like Eric, who's on the buy side, provide kind of a more curated, guided due diligence experience for them. And so, that's, we have a product that we rolled out again this year, we called Deal Vision to support buy-side due diligence. So, a lot of innovation that we're bringing to market based on feedback, exactly like what we're hearing here today, is that, it seems like there's a lot of kind of lingering inefficiencies. So, we're trying to solve for some of those. Two quick things, John, just on prior points that both Eric and Kenneth made. So, on the face-to-face interaction piece, Eric, it's interesting because I was speaking with the head of Corp Dev about 2 weeks ago, said he completed his first deal having never met the counterparty in person. And his response, and I kind of questioned and said, isn't that a little strange? And his response was, yes, it was. But in a way, through the Zoom sessions that they were having on a very regular basis, he almost had a more intimate portrait and understanding of this person's life than if they had just met at, in their conference rooms, right? He said, I knew his pets' names, I knew what he was ordering for takeout, I knew more about this person, and this team at the end of this process than I normally would. So in some ways, this kind of disjointed environment allows for getting an inside view into how people live. And then Kenneth, on your point, in terms of getting creative in due diligence, we've had a number of clients who have been using video through drone footage. So taking drone footage of whether it's oil and gas applications or towers, for instance, but leveraging the video footage that they're gleaning from these drones. And I sound like an old person. My kids would say, drones are, they probably have drones flying outside right now, but it's pretty cool that we're using drones in this application, able to take that video and have a meaningful, be able to extract meaningful information from it within the context of due diligence. So, kind of a cool convergence of technologies there.
That is.
Yeah, I always thought that there's so much media and so much rich media out there with video. Why hasn't been incorporated more into marketing documents and due diligence and Eric, you mentioned product demos and stuff. So I think the direction that we're moving to is just is going to be adding so much value to the M&A process. Kenneth, do you think that technology has kind of leveled the playing field between large investment banks and a boutique kind of M&A advisory firm like yours?
I think it does a couple of things. I think the short answer is I think it bridges the gap a lot. The quality of deliverables, if I think about the quality of pitch decks and things like that and materials, I think now it's just as easy for us to do that as it is for a bigger firm. I think as far as access to data, I think that every year I'm just amazed at what we can get our hands on that helps us in the deal process. And then I think agility. I think that particularly those that are in the marketplace that are using technology, we can, whether we're competing against somebody else that's a small boutique firm like we are, or somebody larger, we can have the same. We can move fast, and it gives us the ability to do it in a way that's really professional and that can stand up against almost any size firm. So maybe that's a little arrogant on my part, but we get some pretty good feedback from clients that have and buyers that indicate that some of the work we do, or some of the work that firms that use some of the tools we do, are just as just as useful, or we're holding our own against larger firms.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Ben, you touched on it, and I want to dive deeper into use of AI applications for deal management. You talked about Deal Vision that you guys have. Can you just expand on that? I know it's a super exciting innovation that you guys are coming out with. So maybe tell us about that.
Yeah. So I guess firstly, just trying to take a step back and talk about artificial intelligence. That's AI has been kind of this lingering on the sidelines of M&A, at least as a talking point for a number of years, like it has in a lot of sectors, to be honest, right? I think a lot of us would see these commercials on TV and, be impressed by what Watson could do, but really kind of scratch our heads and wonder, okay, when is that going to impact, my day-to-day life and what I'm doing, as a professional. So, I think what we're starting to see though is that impact come to bear, and AI is becoming more tangible to folks like ourselves. At the end of the day, I'm not a technologist. I still, it's something where, if you ask me to explain the nuts and bolts of AI, I'd probably get in over my head pretty quickly. But what I'm starting to see, and I think a lot of people are starting to see, is the impact AI can have on their day-to-day lives. And what I mean by that, John, is that, it's not necessarily meant to replace some of the key steps or some of the thinking that takes place or some of the cognitive functions, right? Kenneth talked about that up front, but it is aiming to automate some of the labor-intensive steps up front and accelerate deals. For instance, in contract, looking through contract terms, contracts can be a huge portion of any virtual data room. And so scanning through those, looking for, a change of control provision, for instance, can take a while. Now there's software, we have some software, there are other vendors out there that are able to, leverage AI to be able to find, not just those words, it's not a simple search, but things that could be alluding to a change of control provision within these contracts that could potentially pose a risk. Now, is it foolproof? Are you going to just, sign on the dotted line afterwards that, AI found everything? Absolutely not. I think what it's really designed to be is a complementary technology. It's supposed to accelerate a lot of these processes that we're running, but it's I think it's still in its early stages in terms of how we're going to be applying it. We have a new redaction tool, for instance, that's going to be leveraging AI. So looking for terms around personally identifiable information, that could pose a risk. So we're starting to roll it out in a real meaningful way for our clients. We don't just want to pay it lip service, though. I think a lot of companies, are talking about AI, and people are still kind of left wondering, okay, well, that sounds good in theory, but what does it mean to me? How does that impact me? And so we're really trying to take kind of that grounded approach and thinking about, solving for actual real problems through the lens of AI. So some really exciting things that are, that we're developing, that other vendors are developing. I mean, it's really an emerging technology that I think is really going to transform deal making, over the next few years in ways that we're not necessarily expecting either. I think it really is a technology that's going to shift the way that we do deals, and whether that's at the early stages, identifying targets and being able to canvas vast sources of public information to match to a strategic direction that the company wants to go into, due diligence, to post-merger integration. So there's all sorts of different applications. And I think people are just starting to get their arms around, where it makes sense and how it fits and how we're going to make it work and real for people who, again, at the end of the day, are financial professionals, right? Deal makers. So, it has to be something that can be used and leveraged and appreciated by that crowd.
Yeah, I spoke to an M&A lawyer yesterday, and their firm was using AI to find these, legal terms and concepts, and then heat map them to see where the potential risks were and try to mitigate those risks, right? So really interesting stuff. Kenneth and Eric, just quickly, are you guys seeing the use of AI in any of the transactions that you've worked on? We'll start with Eric.
Not much in that way. I mean, I think leveraging tools like that to kind of point folks in the right direction, I do think that's the wave of the future. I think you're still going to need, as I think Ben was alluding, you're going to need a set of eyes to kind of double check and make sure, but being able to cut out the hours and hours of just sort of reading, whether it's internal or external legal counsel kind of going through, I mean, that's, a lot of legal dollars are being spent trying to find those handful of words, in a contract that's one of 5,000 in a data room or 2,000 in a data room. I think some of the other areas, perhaps on the cybersecurity side, as Ben said, for data security and privacy, I think that's another area where things are headed in that direction. I guess the one other place that I might say that is we'll often do sort of a code a code review. I don't know if that technically falls under the category of AI, but more often than not, there's some sort of black duck audit or something going on where it's just making sure that there's no open source issues or concerns about, software that you're buying, things like that.
Kenneth, anything you'd add on the AI side? Anything
I
you're
think
seeing?
Derek hit most of it. The only thing is competitive intelligence. I see from trying to understand market dynamics, particularly if you're not a strategic buyer, if you're more of a financial buyer trying to understand a competitive marketplace. And I think there's you're starting to see AI being used, or some version of, I guess AI kind of leaves you to think fully automated, but a lot of times I think it's more enhanced search capabilities, or it's or it's some element of machine learning that's being used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Let's move on to kind of the final stage that I see in the M&A process, which is integration. So, Kenneth, as a sell-side advisor, you're not often involved in kind of the integration, but from your experience, do you think that there could be a more efficient handoff of information to from a seller to a buyer that really helps them increase kind of post-acquisition success?
I think so, and we're in a little bit of a unique position because every year we're working on a couple of acquisitions for as kind of the corporate development team for our client is on the buy side, and because of that, we think about, as we're on the sell side, we think about and most of our buyers are either, as I've said, private equity or strategics, and I would say they probably weight more towards strategics. We think about it as there's typically from the buy side, there's strategy, there's a transaction, there's first 100 days integration. And what we found is that from a buy side is if we can get the first 100-day integration aligned really well with that corporate or that acquisition strategy, and then make sure that due diligence aligns to meet what we're expecting from a performance standpoint, then it makes for possibly a really good acquisition. So in that, we think about that, we're on the sell side. So we're pitching a lot of times strategic value to the buyer to try to enhance the value of the transaction. In doing so, we're preparing and we're wanting to demonstrate that value or demonstrate the components that can lead to that value, so that it does, so that we realize it, and so that it becomes through due diligence real, or at least is defensible, if you will. So the answer is on the sell side, yeah, absolutely. Being better prepared on the sell side to support the elements that I hate the word, I'm sure everybody does, the synergies of the deal, and be able to tee up what we know is probably going to happen in that first 100-day integration. It gives us some negotiating leverage for our client, and I think that it is an opportunity for sell-side advisors to bring more value in that process. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, no, great comments. So Ben, I actually took this directly from the Intralinks website, but I'll read out this stat. So over 70% of deals fail to deliver the projected shareholder value that brought the deal to the table in the first place. How do you feel that technology is kind of helping change this statistic?
Yeah, so John, that's an off-cited statistic, and I think there are variations of it, but it's usually in that 60 to 70% range of deals that fail to generate the anticipated shareholder return. And people generally cite post-merger integration as one of the key reasons for those shortcomings, right? So, and I think, partially, there might be some motivations, or, it's easier to point on execution versus this was a terrible idea in the first place, right? It just, so I think people like to point to PMI as kind of one of those pieces where things tend to break down, but I do agree with it. It's a hard process to navigate. It's a hard thing for, and especially in this environment, it's been made even harder. But I think technology can help, and I don't think it's sufficient just to hand over a DVD with the contents of a VDR. I think it's about thinking through, okay, what are the communication streams that we had in due diligence between certain teams, and whether that's through Zoom conference calls or in-person interactions, hopefully in the future. But how do we keep those going after the deal is closed? I think people really struggle to kind of keep that. I think there's usually a pretty healthy dialogue and streams of communication going back and forth, sharing of information during due diligence. And then once the deal is announced, a lot of those things kind of dry up. And it's not just because the VDR is turned off. That's not the reason. That can help with the collaboration, that can help with the communication and the knowledge share. But I think it's really just trying to figure out, especially in this challenging environment, how to keep people communicating, how to communicate what are the what's the 30-day plan, what's the 15-day plan, and hold people accountable to that and track against those things. That requires pretty sophisticated project management capabilities. So whether it's leveraging one of the purpose-built applications for it, Intralinks can help just in terms of day one readiness and having information accessible. So oftentimes, if ever, the information is in sync on day one, right? Mm-hmm. So having that information that's shared in a VDR after the deal is announced can be important. But I think that if I had an easy answer for that, John, I'd be writing books like Kenneth and probably be sitting on a yacht right now. It's a really hard thing to solve for. I think technology can certainly support it. I think it's going to be kind of an amalgamation though of different pieces of technology that are going to be needed to kind of be rolled up and yeah, I mean, it's something that at Intralinks we're constantly thinking about, how to create, and innovate around that step in the deal life cycle. It's a challenging one.
Yeah, for sure. And Eric, I mean, you're the guy that when you do a deal, that dreaded word synergies, you're the guy that has to kind of try to realize on these synergies. So what technologies, what kind of processes are you using to try to make these make these things that you identified during the process could come into reality?
Sure. So I think Ben's absolutely right. I mean, the post-merger integration is really a continuation of due diligence, and it's kind of taking what was discovered in due diligence and then putting steps into place to mitigate or change or do what needs to be done to be able to fix whatever issues were found or to implement the synergy plan, so to speak. So I think whether it's keeping the data room live or figuring out a way to keep the data available to the team, the broader team, I think that's important. Ongoing accessibility to the information, I think is a critical thing. And then the collaboration tools is the other area where you need, you have this big project management effort underway during a due diligence process where, again, somebody like me is kind of helping to conduct the process and keep everybody focused and make sure people are talking to each other. And obviously that's even more important after the deal closes because you need to keep those lines of communication open. You need to have the check-in calls. You need to have the checklists, whether it's in Excel or whether it's more formalized or whether there's a project management tool to do it. I mean, those are the kinds of actions. And I think you need to have somebody, and usually it's the business unit leader that owns the P&L after a deal closes, at least within a big organization. I mean, that person has to be ready to sort of hit the ground running and implement the 100-day plan. And usually we do a pretty good job in advance of that. We like to have our folks under normal circumstances sort of on the ground day one, ready to meet the team, ready to, sort of, welcome them to the organization and sort of lay out what's going to happen over the ensuing, handful of months. But, again, the seamless flow of data and the ongoing collaboration tools and being able to continue to meet virtually in this case, I think those are the most critical things, just to make sure that the plan doesn't get kind of forgotten or people forget what they were looking at during due diligence. And that's actually probably one of the biggest questions that I get asked after a deal closes is, well, where can I find that contract that I was looking at 2 months ago? And fortunately I usually still have it available somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think great advice. Keeping the data room live for a period of time after the transaction probably makes a lot of sense. Great, guys. I think we've gotten through all the phases of the actual M&A process. I wanted to move on to some audience questions, and there are a couple of themes that maybe I'll try to just categorize. So one of the themes that I'm seeing is just around deal size. Is there like a one size fits all for technology, or do smaller deals use different types of technology than bigger deals? Maybe Ben, we can get you to take that one on first.
Yeah, sure, John. It's an interesting one because just going back to my days trying to execute some of these smaller transactions, and at Influence, we support big deals, the mega deals that you see on the front page of the FT and Wall Street Journal, but we do a lot of what I would consider kind of tuck-in strategic acquisitions, and that can vary depending on the organization you're talking to. So anywhere from 5 million in annual sales to it could be 100 million for some larger organizations. But one of the things that I think people confuse or mistakenly think is that small deals equate to easy transactions or easy deals. And I feel like in most cases, the opposite is actually the case, where some of these smaller transactions, they're not sophisticated sellers. They don't understand kind of the processes, the steps, the tools that are commonly used. Who knows if they've ever had an official audit. And so there's a lot of risk associated with those transactions. And so I feel like sometimes the larger deals are almost easier to execute. And we hear that from clients as well. So I guess my point being that, leveraging technology and saving technology just for the mega deals probably, isn't prudent. That, a lot of these smaller transactions, there's a lot of hair on them, a lot of risk associated with them. And sometimes they can, using technology can actually bring more value in those type of transactions than in some of the larger size deals.
Mm-hmm. Kenneth, is Dropbox a good resource for any small deal, or is that do you just go straight to a data room for everything?
We use a data room.
Yeah.
We think a data room is a better solution for. I mean, there are just different features and things like that, and security that we just feel is more appropriate.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Eric, I want to ask you this question. I'm seeing some questions from our audience here just around pitch books, and I think you've probably been a guy that's seen a variety of pitch books from different investment banks and M&A advisors. So, what innovative things are you seeing in pitch books on the communication of potential opportunities?
Sure. So I think we touched on a few of them earlier in the session, but just creativity with more interactive tools, whether it's including links to videos or links to product demos, or including, as I said, sort of a pre-recorded management speech, so to speak, or a pre-recorded demo or a pre-recorded video that kind of helps you to meet the team. So I think people are, especially in this day and age and with the technology and the ability to stream video so quickly, I think people are really taking advantage of that. And, it's certainly not every teaser pitch book that we see, but I would just say the interactive nature of them, it's amazing how that's evolved just in the last 5 years or so. There are more and more interactive tools that are being embedded into these pitch books and management presentations. And so, it just gives you a chance to kind of do a little bit of research and diligence in advance, even of a management meeting, just to learn a little bit more and get smart. And it's, it's easier than reading from cover to cover, right?
Yeah. Ben, is anything online, like a website or anything, overtake kind of just a traditional PowerPoint or PDF in terms of a pitch book? Do you ever see that kind of innovation coming?
Yeah, I never rule anything out, John. And so, yeah, I think there could be, some sort of, when deals are being done in 50 years, it's going to look quite a bit differently than what we're used to. I know the pace of innovation is slow, but yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe there's a dedicated M&A YouTube channel and all the pitches go there. I do think that video is going to be probably further leveraged. That would be the one thing that I would kind of lean into there, just given the feedback that we've heard from clients on the sell side. So, just thinking about, what that pitch book looks like, not saying it's going to be replaced. I think, like Eric mentioned at the much earlier in the call, having that physical artifact to distribute and for people to kind of get their arms around is important. But I think, are there ways, or are there methods of introducing the team or introducing the facility or whatnot through the use of video? That would be if there's a website or service that allows for that, then that's kind of where I would see things potentially trending.
Awesome. Quickly, last question for you, Kenneth. Somebody had asked if there's anything that you're using to win sell-side engagements, any sort of technology or something that gives you an advantage when you're actually pitching in a so-called beauty contest.
So a lot of our, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of our deals come because of relationships. And so being able to, and it kind of ties with something we were just talking about, is I think that the other thing that's changing and becoming more and more available is data and analytics. And so it allows us to be smarter on the front end of looking at a deal, even from pitching to get the deal. And so I think having access to industry data, not just comparable data, but some analytics within an industry, and even being able to just be smarter as we go into a potential transaction. I think that the use of technology there is there's just great opportunity for that. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, awesome, guys. Well, we're up against the hour right now. Listen, I had lots of fun. I love this topic. We're going to send out an email to all of our registrants that will share your guys' contact information. So if anybody wants to reach out to our panelists, they can. Again, really appreciate the time, guys. And, I thought we brought a lot of value to the audience here. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. This is fun.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely.
Take care.